People think the most dangerous moment of their life is when they are at rock bottom, possessing absolutely nothing. They are wrong. Think about the exact moment you finally got what you wanted. That long-awaited promotion, the sudden influx of money, the noticeable shift in your social status. You expected a celebration. Instead, you walked into a room and felt a sudden, suffocating quiet. The way they looked at you had fundamentally changed. The congratulations were a little too forced. The smiles did not quite reach their eyes. You realized in that split second that you were no longer just one of them. You were a target. When you are at the bottom, grinding in the dark, you are mathematically safe. Why? Because you are invisible. You possess absolutely nothing that anyone else wants to take. You can fail, experiment, and make catastrophic errors in total silence, without a single eye tracking your movements. But the second you acquire leverage, the second you actually start winning, the rules of human nature invert completely. Machiavelli understood this invisible danger better than anyone in recorded history. He watched ambitious men spend decades clawing their way to power, bleeding for every inch, only to be systematically dismantled within weeks of reaching the throne. Their fatal mistake was always the same. They assumed the war was over. They assumed the struggle was the dangerous part, and that success was the sanctuary. They failed to realize that the climb requires your ambition. The summit requires your paranoia. That is a truth polite society begs you to ignore. Mainstream culture tells you to celebrate your wins, to share your success, to let your guard down and finally enjoy the fruits of your labor. This is a lethal trap. The moment you gain resources, influence, or visibility, you alter the entire ecosystem around you. You become a source of gravity, and gravity attracts everything: the opportunistic, the envious, and the parasites disguised as loyal allies. You are no longer judged by your potential. You are now judged strictly by what can be extracted from you. You have probably felt this shift already in your own life. You land a major client and suddenly a distant colleague wants to collaborate on your accounts. You start getting in shape, building discipline, leveling up your existence, and your oldest friends start making passive-aggressive jokes about how you have changed. It is not a coincidence. Your elevation forces them to confront their own stagnation. The naive mind believes that a rising tide lifts all boats. The strategic mind understands that your rising tide threatens to drown those who refuse to swim. Because of this, the most lethal threat to your new empire does not come from a masked competitor across the street. It comes from the people already sitting comfortably inside your house, quietly calculating whether you are more useful to them as a shield or as a sacrifice. You must wake up to the reality that the finish line is a myth. Success is merely the price of admission to a much darker, far more sophisticated game. You can spend years constructing the most fortified walls in the world to keep your enemies out. You can hoard wealth, gather influence, and intimidate your rivals into submission. But the first crack in your new foundation rarely comes from an outside attack. It always starts with an internal collapse. You spend years building your reputation, meticulously crafting your image, accumulating leverage. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, in a high-stakes meeting, a peer makes a passive-aggressive remark about your work, or a nameless critic leaves a dissecting, humiliating comment on your public profile. Your pulse spikes. Your ego feels the sting, and your instinct demands blood. You fire back. You raise your voice. You draft the scathing response. You let your anger spill out for everyone to see, determined to put them in their place. In exactly 5 seconds, you have destroyed 6 months of calculated positioning. This is the architecture of an internal collapse. You assumed power was about controlling the room. You forgot that power over a room means absolutely nothing if you do not have power over your own impulses. Emotion is a lever. If you do not control it, someone else eventually will. When you react to an insult, when you let frustration paint your face, you are not showing dominance. You are handing your enemies the exact blueprint to your nervous system. You are showing them precisely what buttons to press when they need you to make a fatal mistake. Machiavelli warned that men who cannot rule their own minds have no business ruling a state. He watched kings lose their thrones, not because they lacked armies, but because they lacked patience. Modern society will tell you to express your feelings, to defend your honor, to live your truth and be authentic. That is a comforting lie designed to keep you weak. A strategist knows that self-control has nothing to do with morality or being a good person. It is a tactical cloaking device. When a competitor provokes you and you absorb the blow with dead, unbothered eyes, you terrify them. Because a person who does not flinch is a person who cannot be predicted. The climb requires your ambition. The summit requires your paranoia. During the climb, your relentless drive pushed you forward, breaking through barriers through sheer force of will. But now that you hold the prize, your unchecked emotions are the greatest threat to your survival. Every time you lose your temper, you leak power. Every time you rush to defend your ego against a slight, you prove to the room that the slight had merit. True power is a quiet, heavy thing. It does not need to shout to prove it exists. Take a cold, surgical look at your own behavior over the past month. How easily can someone else dictate your mood? How quickly can a minor inconvenience, a delayed email, or a subtle sign of disrespect strip away your focus? If the answer is easily, you are building a castle on a fault line. You are playing a dangerously naive game, relying on the desperate hope that nobody ever decides to test your structural integrity. They will test it. In fact, the smarter players in your circle are already testing it. You must train yourself to view every provocation not as an attack, but as an audit of your discipline. When the disrespect comes, let it hit the armor and slide off. Store the information, remember the exact phrasing and the face of the person who threw the stone, but deny them the chaotic reaction they are starving for. Mastering your internal state is merely the prerequisite. The real test arrives when your new status forces the people around you to silently drop their masks. You survive the initial shock of success. You establish your boundaries, you lock down your emotions, and you settle into your new reality. Fast forward 6 months. The revenue is steady. Your position feels secure. The chaotic, hungry energy of the climb has faded into a predictable, comfortable routine. This is exactly where the rot begins. You start to delegate the things that used to require your intense, microscopic scrutiny. You give a long-term partner or a trusted colleague access to critical leverage simply because they have been around for a while and things have been going well. You stop checking the perimeter. You stop auditing the motives of the people walking in and out of your inner circle. You assume yesterday's loyalty guarantees tomorrow's safety. Why do we do this? Because success creates a powerful narcotic illusion of permanence. When you are fighting in the trenches, your paranoia keeps you alive. You question every smile, you scrutinize every contract, and you sleep with one eye open. But victory whispers a very dangerous lie. It tells you that because you won the war, the world has finally agreed to leave you alone. Machiavelli observed this tragedy in the courts of Europe, time and time again. Brilliant commanders, men who survived the absolute brutality of the battlefield through sheer hypervigilance, would return home as heroes. They would trade their heavy armor for silk. They would surround themselves with agreeable flatterers, and they would let their guard down. And they would die in peacetime, destroyed not by a foreign army, but poisoned by a jealous courtier or overthrown by a quiet coalition of smiling aristocrats. Comfort breeds a lethal carelessness. It is human nature to seek rest after a long struggle, but in the game of power, rest is a luxury you cannot afford. The plateau right after a major victory is a graveyard of ambitious people who confused a temporary ceasefire with a permanent peace treaty. The moment you assume your leverage is permanent, you stop actively defending it. And leverage that is not fiercely defended is leverage that is slowly being siphoned away behind your back. Think about the person in your life right now who holds the most operational power over your daily routine, your business, or your resources. You probably trust them implicitly. But ask yourself an uncomfortable question. Are you trusting them because they continue to earn it every single day? Or are you trusting them because questioning them would require energy you no longer want to spend? Convenience is the silent assassin of security. You must remain as relentlessly disciplined in the maintenance of your empire as you were in its brutal construction. If you built your success by checking the numbers twice, you do not stop checking them just because there are more commas. If you climbed the ladder by reading the room with cold, calculating accuracy, you do not stop reading it just because you are now sitting at the head of the table. This exact carelessness, this slow and comfortable drift into willful ignorance, is what blinds you to the most dangerous shift of all. The quiet recalculation happening in the minds of your closest allies. You notice a colleague who used to seek your approval, suddenly pulling away into a cold, polite distance. Or, conversely, someone who used to ignore you completely is now hovering around your orbit, offering excessive praise and unearned warmth. You feel a sudden sense of betrayal. You think to yourself, after everything I did for them, how could they act like this? Let us cut through that comforting illusion right now. You think your friends are turning on you out of nowhere, but they aren't. They are simply responding to the new physics of the room. The climb requires your ambition. The summit requires your paranoia. When you had nothing, you were safe to love because you posed no threat and offered no leverage. But the moment your mass increased, you fundamentally warped the gravity of the entire ecosystem. Machiavelli understood that human beings do not operate on loyalty. They operate on incentives. When you rise, you change the incentive structure for every single person tied to your life. The person who pulls away isn't necessarily malicious. They are intimidated, feeling the crushing weight of your gap compared to their stillness. They resent you because your success is a mirror they refuse to look into. And the person who suddenly clings to you isn't necessarily loyal. They are positioning themselves to harvest whatever fruit your new empire bears. You are taking their behavior personally when you should be viewing it as raw data. Power reveals character faster than a microscope. It strips away the polite fictions of friendship and leaves only the naked calculation of self-preservation. If you spend your time whining about how people have changed, you are wasting the most valuable window of clarity you will ever be given. This is the dagger turn that separates the amateurs from the strategists. You realize that opposition and shifting loyalties are not a sign that you failed. They are the mathematical proof that you are winning. You cannot climb to a higher tier of influence without leaving behind the comfortable, uniform pack of ordinary minds. Friction is the inevitable byproduct of altitude. Once you accept that human loyalty is entirely transactional, you stop getting hurt by betrayals. You stop expecting gratitude from people you have elevated. You start mapping out who belongs in the inner circle, who belongs on the outer perimeter, and who needs to be cut off completely before their quiet resentment turns into active sabotage. Once you see how ruthlessly incentives dictate loyalty, you realize you can never afford to show them your full hand again. Modern culture screams at you to be an open book. Social media demands constant documentation, complete vulnerability, the total exposure of your metrics, your strategies, and your internal struggles in the name of authentic connection. This is psychological suicide, disguised as community. When you broadcast every card you hold, you strip away the one weapon that keeps people from moving against you: mystery. Think about it from this perspective of an opponent or a fair-weather ally. If they know your exact financial runway, your exact skill ceiling, your real limits, and your psychological triggers, they do not need to guess. They can map out a precise campaign to dismantle you. They know what to provoke, what to avoid, and where your foundation is hollow. Transparency is often just a polite word for structural disarmament. Machiavelli observed that rulers who laid their entire strategy bare before their court were overthrown much faster than those who kept their intentions wrapped in deliberate ambiguity. He understood that information is leverage, and leverage is currency. When you hand your currency away for free for the cheap dopamine hit of online validation, you become an empty vault. The climb requires your ambition. The summit requires your paranoia. And part of that paranoia is recognizing that your capabilities are a strategic asset, not a badge of honor, to be flashed in public spaces to impress people who want to see you fail. There is a profound psychological weight to someone who never reveals their entire capacity. When people do not know what you are truly capable of, they treat you with a cold, constant caution. They hesitate before trying to outmaneuver you because they assume there is a hidden layer of strength they haven't mapped yet. Hesitation is the mother of safety. The moment you prove everything you can do, you eliminate that hesitation, inviting challengers to test your limits directly. Certainty breeds contempt. Ambiguity commands respect. This does not mean you hide in the shadows or pretend to be incompetent. It means you deliver undeniable results while keeping the mechanics of your machinery completely dark. Let them see the product, but never the blueprint. Let them taste the outcome, but never the ingredients. When your next move is completely unpredictable, the entire room is forced to adjust to you, rather than you having to constantly defend yourself against their predictable traps. You keep them guessing, not just to maintain daily leverage, but to buy yourself the time required to build a structure that doesn't need you awake to defend it. Look closely at the average person who claims to have built an empire. Watch them closely when they try to step away for a single week. The moment they disconnect, the phone starts ringing, the fires break out, and the entire operation threatens to collapse into absolute ash. They smile and call this being indispensable. A strategist calls it being a prisoner. If your entire creation depends on your physical presence, your constant micromanagement, and your personal intervention to survive, you do not own an empire. You simply own a very stressful, high-stakes job that you can never quit. The climb requires your ambition. The summit requires your paranoia. But true power requires your absolute dispensability. Machiavelli observed that the rulers who left behind the most enduring dynasties were never the ones who tried to control every single gear in the machine forever. They were the ones who understood a colder, harder truth. They built systems that could function without them. They trained capable lieutenants, established unyielding protocols, and deliberately engineered a structure strong enough to outlive the man who built it. This requires a level of humility and strategic foresight that most ambitious people deeply despise. It forces you to let go of the ego-driven illusion that everything must bear your fingerprint to be done correctly. It forces you to share authority, to build redundancy, and to accept that a well-designed machine can run smoother when the architect steps back into the shadows. If you are the only thing holding your world together, you are its single point of failure. This is the ultimate conclusion of everything Machiavelli mapped out centuries ago. Rising is merely the entry fee. Surviving the immediate aftermath of success is the real test of your intellect. Controlling your impulses, remaining relentlessly vigilant when comfort invites carelessness, mapping the raw incentives of the people around you, and refusing to hand your capabilities over to the public gaze. These are the tools of the upper 1%. Tomorrow morning, when you step back into your daily arena, do not look for motivation. Look for vulnerabilities. Audit your circle with cold clarity. Keep your mouth sealed about your true capacity. Expect resistance, and stop taking it as a personal insult when the world reacts to your rise. Build something that does not require your daily exhaustion to remain standing. If this analysis cut through the noise and showed you the game as it actually is, acknowledge it quietly. Hit the like button to secure this perspective before the algorithm buries it. Share it with someone in your circle who is currently building in the dark and needs to see the traps before they walk into them. And if you prefer your truths cold, sharp, and stripped of all emotional illusion, subscribe to the channel. The game is constantly evolving. Make sure you are the one playing it, instead of being played.